Blog Talk Radio.
The world system in which we're all embedded is draining resources from the weakest places and pouring those resources into the most affluent places in a way that's destroying the so-called third world and is consigning ever more people to grinding poverty and extreme social disorder using a global loan sharking scheme administered through the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and it's secured and it's enforced by United States military power. And this exploited and dominated periphery is not geographically circumscribed by national boundaries, but exists in several forms right here inside the United States. The same system that colonizes people in general in the periphery also colonizes women, and it colonizes nature, because it advances under the banners of progress and growth. But when you unfold these banners all the way, you find white supremacy, patriarchy, the dangerous Cartesian fallacy that human beings can conquer nature, and in bold face you find war. And in bold face you find war. This system is based on the twin imperatives of competition and expansion. And when capitalists tell us that they have to seek the lowest wages to remain competitive, they're not making excuses. This is the truth. This is a system very much like, and I would say exactly like, cancer. It will grow until it kills its host, which is the biosphere and its residents, beginning with all those peripheral peoples. This system is capitalism. It is a world system, and it not only requires war, it depends absolutely on racism and patriarchy, and it is inevitably leading us all to ecocide. We do not have global capitalism that floats above the earth like a spirit. It is concrete. It is industrial capitalism, driven not only by the energy of human bodies, but on the energy that life left behind on the earth hundreds of millions of years ago, and that's fossil energy. And a system that's defined by growth, and in a system where that growth is based absolutely on fossil fuel, and in a period when one section of global society has a high standard of living based on energy consumption that includes the exploitation of these peripheries, that high standard of living, that American way of life does absolutely depend on securing these diminishing resources by any means necessary. This system requires war. This system requires war.
That speaker was Stan Goff, spelled Goffs. He is a former member of the U.S. Military Special Forces, 26-year career with the military, and that's from his book and lecture, Full Spectrum Disorder, The Military in the New American Century. Hi, you're listening to ZM Global Radio, and this is Jen Wilding. I am doing kind of an impromptu show tonight, or today, whenever you're listening, but tonight for me as I'm recording, because I've been inspired by news, current events, things going on, things that affect our lives in a big way, or for some people that don't affect their lives at all, seemingly so, at least, because they're so busy living life, they don't realize things that are going on. In particular, I'm wanting to talk about the United States doing a strike on Syria in a response to an alleged chemical weapons detonation by the Assad regime in Syria. And one of the reasons I want to talk about this is because there's a lot of information circulating, and I probably have about the same amount of frustration as many of you do when trying to find out accurate information, trying to find the real story. It's really hard to get real information through news sources in particular when it's in regard to national security issues, because so many things are classified or not available or are conflicting, depending on your source. And so I'm going to give you my take on the situation in Syria. It's just my take as a human being, as a resident of the United States, trying to get as much information as I can. So I've been following the conflicts in the Middle East for a couple of years now, and it's something that I never thought I would follow. Mostly, I've always been a person who has not really given much thought for the bulk of my life to politics. I didn't care about it. I didn't want to care about politics. I knew a lot of it was garbage, and I just thought a lot of it was just noise, and that it didn't affect me, or it wouldn't really impact me. And even from a sense of being an activist in a political sense as a voter, I have always been disillusioned about how we don't really get a vote, we don't really get a say. And this is a great example, this particular event is a great example of how we don't really operate in a democracy. And even when people say that, that's kind of the cliche way to think of the United States as a democracy. It's not really even set up to be that. It's supposed to be a democratic republic, but it's not even that. It's more of a corporatocracy or an oligarchy, those kinds of things. But not everyone sees it that way, though I think that they're starting to come to see things that way. In particular with Syria, let's see. In the past couple of weeks, Obama has come out, the U.S. spokesperson, right, has come out to say that we need to strike militarily in Syria against Assad in response to this chemical weapons attack that happened. And the United States government claims that we have definitive sources for having solidified Assad as having perpetrated mass murder of thousands, approximately 1,400 people in his own country. We haven't gone into the specific reasons Assad might have done this. We just like to focus on the fact that, this guy's really evil, that he would do this. So we shouldn't just sit back and let that happen. But the thing is that would be really stupid of Assad to do for many reasons. But Syria has been in a supposed, and I'm going to use it in quotes, civil war, quote unquote, right? Civil war, where you have the Assad regime in power, and you have various other groups calling themselves sort of freedom fighters in Syria, wanting to free Syria from the Assad regime. We don't really know what else they want, at least I don't. Maybe somebody does. But they seem to be a collective of many different groups from even other regions that have come in and sort of started waging war on Assad's government there. And in the process, many Syrians, in a sense, who are not involved in this conflict, who didn't have a problem with their government, who are living their life, or at least not any beef that they would go to war with their government over, have perished or have been displaced. In fact, the number is up to about 2 million people who are displaced from Syria, who are seeking refuge in neighboring countries anywhere they can. And you can imagine what that life might be like and how that affects and impacts the neighboring countries that were not involved in their local conflict. So a couple of things that have been interesting about this event of Obama saying we need to strike as a response. First of all, there is more than one response available to us. It's not only war. There is a diplomatic option that's not ever been talked about. But there is something called the ICC, the International Criminal Court, that's in the Netherlands that could be pursued for this. But no, we haven't talked about that. And the reason we haven't talked about that is because about a year ago, Obama made a statement towards Assad that if he ever used chemical weapons, that it would be the proverbial red line that he would have crossed in order to entice us into action, which is key, by the way, because when you look at all the players here, the United States coming to get involved in Syria also then involves allies of Syria, which, by the way, are China, Russia, and Iran, and Brazil. So it's not just Syria if we make a move. It is other countries that might get involved if anyone attacks Assad's regime based on their set positions of allegiance. So a lot of people don't know that, or they haven't considered that. Another thing that's interesting about being angry about Assad's chemical weapon use is that suddenly the U.S. government is really indignant about someone using chemical weapons against their people. And they should be, because that's horrible. That's a horrific thing, by the way. And it's something that should not be tolerated. However, if it were not tolerated to the extent that anybody who perpetrates that or is associated with perpetrating that should be demolished, then we wouldn't even have a government talking to us in the United States, because we're actually guilty of that through many different ways. If you stay within the realm of chemical weapons, we believe in the 80s, during the Iran-Iraq war, aided Saddam Hussein with intelligence to use chemical weapons against Iranians, killing people. We facilitated that knowingly, although it was hush-hush. We didn't make a big deal about it. It wasn't on the news that we were doing that, as far as, hey, look what we're doing today. We're supporting the use of chemical weapons in this country today. That kind of stuff we don't see, if you haven't figured that out yet. We've also used Agent Orange and napalm and tear gas in Vietnam. We've also used depleted uranium in Iraq. And as a result, there are now considerable problems there with babies being born with horrific birth defects. That's all United States government that did that. So we're in a pretty interesting position to come out and say, as John Kerry says, the U.S. Secretary of State, it's a moral atrocity that Assad has committed that is deserving of this kind of action. Because if that were reflected upon our own government, like I said, they would have been demolished a long time ago. So it's definitely a double standard. And of course, a lot of this is because we're in alliance with the Israeli government's interests. There is a huge lobbying group that has a lot of influence on the United States executive branch. It's called AIPAC. AIPAC. It's the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And that's really key to our real business in the Middle East. And I shouldn't say our, because there's a huge difference between the governments I'm speaking of and the people of their countries, including Israel, including Syria, including Iran. These war maneuvers are being made by people who have the decisions and to make about the use of weapons. I don't have that decision to make. Nobody asked me what should be done. But I'm telling you my opinion of what I think of it in the only way that I can. Let me give you a good resource to check out, actually. There's a YouTube video online called Syria, What is Really Going On and Why? And it's the channel of Ryan Dawson, and he goes by R-Y, Dawson, D-A-W-S-O-N. And it's like maybe about a 5-minute video or so that goes into really good explanation. And I wouldn't even use it here as an excerpt because you need to see what's going on a map in order to really understand things. But essentially, it really hits home that what's in the Middle East? Why does anybody care? Why is everybody always focused on the Middle East when there's so many other conflicts going on that we could get involved in, especially humanitarian, right? If we want to use that word as a reason we get involved with anything. This is how much of a joke it is. The Caspian Basin in the Middle East is a source of oil and gas, a lot of it. And it pretty much serves the markets of Europe and Asia. And right now, Israel is sort of a middleman to those markets. And that is a huge economic boon for Israel. And what's at stake is that there are a lot of other people who are able to produce oil, who want to route pipelines through other regions other than Israel so that they can get their piece of the pie to these same markets, and in particular to India and China. And that's such a threat, apparently, to the market overall that it's of great interest to Israel, and thus, as a result of our I should stop saying that, of the United States government's relationship with the Israeli government, that is not a good thing for people to get their hands on, or to, I shouldn't say get their hands on, to build pipelines in regions that would, in any way, shape, or form, threaten the existing market. Okay, so a lot of the instability in the Middle East, where the U.S. has gone in for supposedly to stabilize a region and has really not stabilized it, but is sort of maintaining a destabilization, there's a strategy behind that, believe it or not. It's actually more beneficial to keep things to keep anyone else who has economic interests from gaining momentum and power. Yeah, they're trying to prevent new pipelines from undermining the existing business going on. And so that has put in the line of fire, to solidify this strategy to maintain the economics there, a lot of countries on the map that the United States government has been interested in destabilizing, breaking up, or occupying, and helping Israel. And so here we are with Obama's version of the weapons of mass destruction cry that got us into the Iraq War. Of course, we all learned that we were lied to, and yet we still, have presence in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, all these places that we demonize whoever's there. We say we have to go in. We absolutely do. It's sort of a live or die kind of thing. We need to go and save the day. We need to produce a democratic society there. And then we send our military aid. Obama has essentially decided that let me back up a little bit. And I won't even say Obama, because it's not just Obama as a human being doing this. If he weren't around, it would be someone else. This is part of the system that is set up, and that I need to stress as well. So I'm going to refer to this as the U.S. government, because it's really been, even since, as long as I can remember, through all of those presidents, Reagan, Bush, George W. Bush, Clinton, all of these presidents have had a piece in this economic strategy that has been about maintaining and acquiring. And their perspective is very different from the way I view the world and the way I'd like to view the world. And I don't view it as, a nationalist war of powers. I view it as we're people on planet Earth. So it's a paradigm shift just to even get in the mindset of our political leaders, right, who are making these decisions and have all these big toys to play with. And I use the term leader loosely. The United States government has had Syria on the agenda for quite some time. And one way that I know this is that I have been following the events in the region. And from all accounts that I can gather of people on the ground, there was no reason for people within Syria to start a civil war against their government. It happened after the U.S. invaded Libya and took care of, right, Gaddafi. The United States has a history of when it's pretty obvious that the U.S. people would not go to war for this reason, for resource acquisition and empire building, right? You can't just sell that easily to the public. It's pretty well known that the government resorts to using mercenary armies, contractors. Al-Qaeda, by the way, is a CIA-trained entity. Anyway, so we collectively in the U.S. have heard the term Al-Qaeda as, the terrorists, and yet it seems that we do quite a lot of business with them. When we need something done in the Middle East, we hire groups to do what we want them to do. Create instability, to steal weapons, to provide intel, and we pay them money. And this is what was going on in Libya, and about that same time, I personally believe we were doling out weapons, especially surface-to-air missiles that went missing, about 20,000, to what we are now calling the Syrian rebels. That's my theory, okay, based on things that I've picked up. But of course, I can't verify these things 100%. It's just seems very likely. So I'll leave you with that. You can do your own research on that. So my personal take is that the United States had very established and public interests that preceded the civil war in Syria. And the Syrian rebels, I think, are funded by the U.S., frankly. And you can call me a conspiracy theorist, that's fine. I like to think that I am someone personally who conspires to sanity, which is why I evaluate these things and I examine these things, and I want to know the truth about these things because I want a real solution. But again, my agenda isn't empire building and trying to be the best national power there is, or try to take resources from other people so that I can live. That's not my mindset. And this is who we're working with. So the powers that be, so to speak, have been pulling the strings here as far as I'm concerned. And I don't think that this new maneuver is any different. I think that this recent call of chemical weapons is manufactured. Perhaps. One of the things that makes me think that is a couple things. First of all, usually the strategy of the United States is to try to get something done through, relationships, diplomacy, asking leaders if they'll do things our way. And when that doesn't work, we resort to other things. And I think other things is first, not using United States resources, but using other nations' resources, including human resources, to get a job done. And when that doesn't work, then we try to find ways to justify in the United States public's mind going to war for a reason that they would accept, that would allow resources to be used for this purpose. So I think the first step was trying to work with Assad and probably see where he was as far as our interests. And when that didn't work, creating a civil war there. And when that didn't work, trying to get other countries involved who also have somewhat of an interest in that region. In particular, Turkey also has an interest in securing pipelines. I would say, more specifically, the Turkish parliament or the government there. Again, the difference between the government and the people there, very different. The Turkish government has been on board for their own reasons, sort of helping Israel and helping the U.S. And what happened last year, around October 2012, was that the United States requested of the Turkish parliament sort of that they take their human resources and invade Syria or go to war with Syria in order to probably overthrow Assad. And this was a result of what they used as a catalyst was they tried to say, I think 5 Turkish people were killed by Syrian fighters, and I think they were probably, who knows what side they were really on, but during the Civil War, it was thrown at the Assad regime military, I guess, positioning that they were with his side of the conflict. And so the Turkish parliament decided they were going to try to have their people go to war. Well, kudos to the Turkish people. They took to the streets and protested. And they protested saying, we know what this is really about. We know this isn't really about our interests, that this is really about U.S. and Israeli interests. And we don't want to kill ourselves for your cause, essentially. And so it didn't work. They didn't go to war. They didn't get people rallied for that cause. And if you want to look up, there's some footage of that protest. The only footage that I could find, though I didn't go looking too far, is just something that I had bookmarked during that time, is a video on YouTube called Protests in Turkey Over Syria Mandate. And that's from October 2012, and it's the channel of the Telegraph TV. It was the Telegraph in UK that had a very short segment covering the protests. And during that segment, you'll see that the protesters acknowledge, they'll say, look, the reason why the U.S. government wants us to do this is because it's election time in the U.S. and it looks bad for Obama to be trying to get elected while trying to send his own people to war. So they're much more up on the current events there, and I think as they should be, because it impacts them. That's such a tight region that when there's war in those countries, it impacts all of the surrounding countries significantly, even from the refugee impact. So they take an interest. They really want to know what the reason for things is, and they're on to us, to the U.S. Basically, then I think the next step was, well, then we're going to have to try to use U.S. resources. How do we do that? Well, we know that Obama already did this setup about a year ago. He did say that the red line was, if you use chemical weapons, then we must strike. And who's going to argue with that? So I don't know who used chemical weapons, because at this point in time, we don't have evidence of whether it was in fact the Assad regime or the Syrian rebels or an Al-Qaeda rogue group or any other neighboring interest that came in and did that. So we don't really know who did it. Of course, the U.S. government says they know definitively that it was Assad and that they have evidence, and they may show you pictures of dead people. Which, by the way, I can't verify. What's that from? We've killed people too. What's that from? What I would be interested in is the United Nations investigation, which, and this is another reason why it seems really bogus, outside of the just mere reason why I already knew we needed to go in there, right? We already planned it to go into Syria, by the way. But the reason it looks bogus is because the United Nations attempted to prove who did it, to investigate before any action was taken. But when they made the move to do that, our first knee-jerk reaction was, absolutely not, we're going to strike anyway. And I'm sorry, but we're dealing with people's lives here. If you strike somebody with a bomb, even if you're trying to hit Assad, you're also going to kill civilians, most likely, and members of the military, which maybe you wanted to hit. But it's also, it's death for death is basically what we're talking about, which, again, is not the only option. There is another option, but it's not ever discussed. We're given a false choice of either not saying anything, which makes us look bad, or, right, quote-unquote, look bad. So, yeah, Obama has gone back and forth at this point in time. Once he first announced that, this was the first time, and this was a highlight of these events, the first time that I've noticed in our military intervention that people took to Facebook and Twitter and journalists and started digging in like, this is not necessary. Does this really need to happen? Where's the proof? Where's the proof that Assad did it, and is this really the only option? And it really came down to, even if you were to take a poll of how many people in the United States are interested in that being our response, I think it was right around 9% of people were in line with Obama's motion to strike. So that's problematic for him. So he needed to take a step back, and he needed to work on some public relations stuff. One of the reasons why people were very critical of him was that he didn't ask Congress before saying he was going to make this move. And that's a big deal because, earlier in his candidacy, Obama very specifically said that a president shouldn't take action without Congress approval. But in reality, it hasn't mattered yet, so why not? He was totally going to act on that. I think if it weren't for the outcry of public dissent and international dissent of other countries not being behind this, he would have just gone ahead. Because again, this is already the plan. The plan has always been, before this chemical weapons event, like I said, we tried to get the Turkish people to go to war on behalf of the U.S. interests and Israeli interests. Didn't work. So we're trying this route, and it didn't look like it was going to work, but it's got to work, because otherwise it's a no-go, and it's already been planned. So we have to go through the illusion of, let's ask Congress. And how do you get Congress on board? Well, you can tell them a lot of lies. And that's my way of looking at it. You can tell them a lot of lies. You can be really persuasive if you're telling people that you have all the information you need and you're sharing it with them and saying it's from intelligence source. By the way, a lot of the information supposedly gathered by the U.S. is from intercepted calls by the Israeli government or something that prove that it was Assad. And yet we don't get to hear those. We don't get to see the transcripts of those. It's just definitive hearsay from the very two governments who absolutely have an interest to do something militarily there anyway, who say, wow, this is definitive evidence that we're not going to share with you. Even Putin in Russia is saying, I need evidence. And, he wants evidence because he's allied with Syria, and he doesn't want to be supporting somebody who is legitimately killing their own people. But again, at this point, it would be completely moronic for Assad to have even made that move in a legitimate sense, to murder his own people after he knew that would start pretty much World War III. And it would be disastrous for that. Beyond even just killing those people, he wouldn't have gained anything by doing that. So you really have to believe that Assad is a crazy dictator. He's a crazy dictator to really go that route. That's another reason why I think it's hocus pocus, and we're wagging the dog here. I have to say that Russia has recently come out with the perfect response as far as the game goes. And that's where we are at this point in time. So by the time you're listening to this, you'll know what happened next. But right now, basically, Russia decided to pick up on something that John Kerry mentioned in a talk about Syria when someone asked him if there was any possible way that they wouldn't be on the receiving end of a U.S. strike. Like, how can they possibly get out of it? And he said something to the effect of, well, if they got rid of their chemical weapons and they were secured internationally, then that would be the case. But then he quickly said, but that's not going to happen. And, he actually said that's never going to happen. And he dismissed it. And that is just something him talking off the cuff. Well, what's really interesting is the next move on the part of Russia, representing, an ally of Syria, right, is that, okay, I just heard the end, so how about this? We'll step in, the Russian government, and we will intercept and collect all of the chemical weapons that Syria has and keep them in a nice, safe place so that they're not used. How about that? And I think it was a total checkmate on their part. I don't think the U.S. government saw that coming at all. They were full speed ahead. Just basically the last couple weeks have been a PR campaign to try to get Congress and somewhat of the American people, but more so Congress, on board with the action. And it hasn't gone well, but that should say that depends on what news source you're getting your information from. Some of them say, oh yes, it's a sure thing. A lot of people do not want to do it, and rightfully so. They shouldn't want to strike. So when Russia offered this, I thought that's actually very brilliant of them, because what it does is it sets the United States government up to look to be vulnerable for their real reason, their real interests in Syria, which have nothing to do with the chemical weapons, because they're going to want to press ahead regardless. This has been on the agenda of the U.S. for quite some time. So basically where we are right now is we're going to go in. As far as I know, Congress, enough members of Congress came around saying, yes, we need to do this. And then as soon as I started seeing that, I started to see the public turn a little bit, because there's been more and more hammered about pictures of dead people, and these were the people killed, and this is the number of people killed. And again, these are not proven evidence images that I'm aware of. There is a lot of conflicting evidence. There's even somebody saying that the rebels have confessed, which I also sort of think may be manufactured, but just perhaps to stop the invasion. But look, this is what we're dealing with. The United States goes in, and then now all of these other countries have to take an interest in defending Syria, which is, Russia, China, Iran. And the other reason why Syria is important to the United States is that it gives us the very location that a location that has kept Iran stable. And we've been wanting to go to war with Iran, so it will make it that much easier when we do, because of course that's on the list too. It'll be the final hurrah, right? So you can kind of see how there's this whole churning going on in the region for power just over this one potential strike. And it's because of the allegiances, it's because of who's going to have to back who. The United States government wouldn't really be sending a little missile to like spank Assad. That's not what this is about. And they claim that it's not about regime change. It may not be about regime change. It's probably just about having a reason to come in and occupy with U.S. military to make sure that things that we want done on behalf of Israel get done. And I say we, again, I mean from the perspective, the sarcastic perspective of the U.S. government, U.S. military. What's interesting here, too, is the other players involved in this action are the U.S. military and even other countries that would support it, the British as well. It's kind of been a challenge for them to really pull through on this strike, and with the support of Congress and with British government and just any international support, it's just really not there. And it's because anybody who's paying attention knows this isn't really about chemical weapons. This isn't really just a strike. And there are other options. It's just that this is the United States government really just deciding we're going to do this. And some interesting things to consider are that, too, members of the United States military who have been deployed on these other military actions, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, all the various stations that we have, right, because the world is now sort of declared a battlefield technically from a U.S. government perspective. We have bases everywhere. The U.S. military is really getting tired of this because most people that joined the military, they did so for a couple reasons. Primarily, it's economic, to be honest with you. A lot of people like to get taken care of through that decision. And also because they really believe that they're going to be doing a service to their country and their friends and family, right? That's why most people, I guess, I'm assuming, would join a military where you're really putting your life on the line in warfare. And the interesting thing is that as a result of these wars we've been participating in, that the United States has perpetuated, have been both something that we have as a culture benefited from economically because it's created a shit ton of jobs here. We've, in the past, 8 or more years, maybe tripled our military in size as far as funding and reach. And there's obviously so many defense contractors that are lobbying for us to continue warfare. And in fact, a lot of the members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee are receiving funds from prominent defense contractors who are voting now, yes, we should strike. I wonder why. So there is an economic benefit that comes from war. Okay, so there's an economic benefit. There are definitely players that can benefit from continuing war because we've created this gigantic war machine that makes a lot of people a lot of money. There are reasons why they would want to perpetuate needless wars. And our military is catching on to that and is weary of that because it doesn't line up with the same reason they signed up to be of service. Especially because when they are deployed and they are in these places, they're starting to catch on. Wait a minute, what are we really doing here? How does this really impact United States national security? Just because it's classified as such, does it really? And what's amazing is that there are a lot of people that come back from military service and are so emotionally distraught that they commit suicide. We've had more people in the United States commit suicide after having been on a military mission, especially from the Iraq War, than we had people killed in 9/11. So it's something to consider. That's Americans that are going to do the bidding of the United States government's military call to action, who have had so many second thoughts about what's really going on from having had that experience. And then, it's hard to assimilate back into a society, a culture that isn't really caring about the news. It isn't really caring about what they just did and that they risked their lives when they come back. It's about, the Kardashians. It's about American Idol. It's about Lindsay Lohan. It's about, whatever stupid stuff, tabloid stuff, gets circulated more so than these issues, which is a shame. So also just having a privileged life, coming back into where you can shower once a day, where you can eat 3 meals a day, and try to live normally after the things that you've seen in warfare. I can only imagine how challenging that is, and I know that a lot of them are dealing with post-traumatic stress syndrome too, and need help with that. So there's a huge emotional cost. There's a huge loss of just to suicides alone. Someone gave me a statistic recently. I haven't checked it out, though. That was something like 1 every 3 days at this point. But it used to be at least 100 a month suicides. So I just want you to think about that. These are things that are not getting covered in the news, and it's the other casualties of war that are not discussed. These wars are not happening because citizens or the average person is calling for war. These are people who are playing the game from a position of power that is like a big chess game of who's going to grab the most resources, essentially. I mean, this is not about chemical weapons use and how atrocious that is. What's interesting about this is the picture that the United States government paints of the Assad regime, in particular Assad, is that he's this evil guy, evil dictator, and this is the reason why we need to ask no questions. We need to go right in and just take an action. Not that we want to do regime change. Again, they're not really giving any strategy. It's just going to be a little strike, just to let him know that he shouldn't do that. Well, let's be honest. The United States government, as far as the kinds of things that come out about what people would say about, of course Assad would have done this to his people because he has tortured people who oppose him and killed them. I just think, well, what do we do in Guantanamo, right? As far as the United States goes. So, yeah, torture there. And other prisons, too. There's a whole separate issue with just what goes on as far as the United States circulation of people throughout the system, where you can't even track prisoners accurately. So, what do we do about all of this? I recently saw a video where Stefan Molyneux was talking about these issues. He's got a lot of great statistics. I don't entirely agree with his assessment. He thinks it's not as much about oil as it is just the money for the defense military-industrial complex piece of it. He also doesn't talk much about Israel, our relationship there, but as far as why the United States would be wanting to do this. But what's interesting in his own assessment of the situation is he brings up how there's no coincidence that the United States culture is obsessed with zombie movies. And I laughed about that because I recently saw World War Z, that zombie movie, and I was kind of thinking about these events when I was watching that. And Stefan's assessment was that the reason why we're so obsessed is because it's representative of our current U.S. economic system. That it's basically our economy died many years ago, and that we're just trying to revive it any way we can, and starting wars is the only way we can revive it. We're trying to stretch that, use military force. Also, that's tied to the fact that, and this is important to mention as well, U.S. currency is so devalued, and a lot of these countries that have been targeted have decided to independently not really cater to our needs as far as the way we want to do business with acquiring oil. So it's been interesting to see that anybody that decides they're independent from us, and in particular not interested in U.S. currency, gets put on the hit list, essentially, it seems. But zombies, I think, are a good metaphor for the fact that in this environment that we have, this artificial scarcity-driven environment where people are fighting for resources, fighting for the power to have access to resources and control resources and be able to sell resources and be able to have people trade with our resources to survive, to try to keep it going, is sort of like a parasitic, something that is dead but is parasitic, and that's definitely right up there with zombies, right? They're essentially human parasites. Our system is set up to run a program through people that also kills the host in that sense. It's very zombie-like. We are, as a result of these actions and taken independently, all, working for economic gain, for profit, we're creating an environment that's toxic to us as we do this. We are creating an environment that is not conducive to good physical and mental health. It's overstressed with labor, or even with people in these war-torn regions. Even in Yemen, the United States, I should correct again, the United States has even dropped a couple of bombs in Yemen, as far as drone bombs, to kill terrorists. And here's what's interesting about that. I don't know, I couldn't tell you their names. I couldn't tell you why they're worthy of being blown to bits. That information isn't shared. It's classified. And it's a country that has been representing me in a way I don't like to be represented. But this is all cultural. We're all a part of the system. And I really do think that we're getting to a point where the biopsychosocial pressures are starting to set in. And the only thing that keeps me optimistic, obviously the Zeitgeist Movement, activists, people who are activists for a resource-based economy, Venus Project folks, you too. You keep me going, and also that I do see people opening their minds to wanting to know, what's this really about? Why do we really have to go to war again? I'm finally starting to hear questions from people I didn't think would be asking them. They didn't take an interest before. And it's going to be more questions as it impacts us more personally, either from an economic, primarily I think from an economic standpoint. I think where you see the people in mass in the streets, like Egypt, where you see like the Arab Spring, that tends to happen where there's more economic unrest, where you've seen that happen in Greece, or Portugal, or where you've had people, or Spain, in the streets in such a mass, it's filling the streets. Usually that's where there's such a huge divide between those who have jobs and those who don't, or can't get jobs, or can't get an education. And we're getting there in the U.S. We're working towards that. I hate to say it, but it tends to be trending to that. And as many times as I've heard people say, don't talk about collapse because we're just going to patch it up and go again. Well, understand, this is a sustainability movement. We are a movement to advocate a resource-based economic solution for sustainability. And that means that we're combating something that's unsustainable. Means it can't survive on its own, right? It can't thrive on its own. It needs change or assistance. So when you think about it that way, whenever I talk about a collapse, it's, if we continue to do the same things we're doing, we can patch it up temporarily. We can start wars and try to boost an economy. But people still die, and the environment still becomes toxic, and people get stressed and have emotional difficulties and health problems, and resources are scarce, not because they need to be. It's just the system we're in, our value system. We need a value system shift. We need to start looking at cooperation as something that's a real value instead of competition as something that's a real value. It's very Middle Ages, but not that had its day and its time, but we now have the technology to feed and clothe and educate everyone on planet Earth. We can do it. The roots of these conflicts are primarily economic. And if you even want to talk about securing land, what's in the desert? Is it really because of Holy Land, or are the religious stories perpetuated in those regions over acquiring strategic positions in relation to energy, fossil fuels, hydrocarbons? We could move to a different source, but only if we got off the monetary system, because you can't do it within a monetary system. It would cost so much more money than what the benefit would be initially, which is why it isn't happening, which is why people are killing each other for resources. For me, that's just all the more reason to be looking into, even just curiously. Even if you think that, I don't know, I find some flaws in a resource-based economic model. Well, okay, but would it be better than what we have now? I'm saying it's hard for me to find flaws because it's a methodology, and the methodology is the use of the scientific method, and in order for it sort of proves itself. So if my strategy is to do the thing that is proven to work, then it's really hard for me to accept that you saying, well, it's not going to work using the scientific method. Well, I guess it depends on the overall philosophy of what your goal is that you're trying to get to work, and that's where people may not see eye to eye. Anyone that thinks that they really are, from their race or religion or whatever, better than another group of people, even from a standpoint of intelligence, like they just magically more deserving of things, is not going to see eye to eye with a movement that's about genuine equality in a sense of access to resources. But for those people who may be interested, I think they should consider getting out of the monetary system and onto a system that uses the scientific method for social concern, and that educates other people to be sure that we are realigning with our values. The resource grab, what is it for? Survival. And the reason we're still doing it is because we haven't learned at the very core of our culture that this is not the way to get that result. It's not the optimum way for certain, and it's counterproductive in a way that we're like zombies. The current culture is very much a zombie culture in that way. People being parasitic to one another, whether it's individuals versus individuals or countries versus countries. But I think the biopsychosocial pressure is building up. One thing I highly recommend at this point in time, if at all possible, is to boycott the military. I know that's challenging when economic times get tough, because for some people they view it. I've had discussions with people who say, I don't want to go, but I feel like it's my only option. Pretend like it's a life or death issue, because it is, and find another option. Support troops who are saying they're not going to be deployed. Actively support them. Support journalists who are wanting to reveal the truth about what's going on, who are wanting to get to the root cause of these things, to the economic cause of these things, instead of just wanting to call somebody evil and point fingers. They need our support. Educate people. And I want to encourage you, if you're someone who's ever thought, oh, well, you, Jen, need to do this, because if you do this, then this is going to change people's minds. I've had people tell me that I need to do videos, I need to do an article on this, I need to do various things, and it's flattering. It's very nice. But I have to say, what that really is your own subconscious that's suggesting that to yourself, and you just frankly don't have the balls to do it. But I'm going to say, please have the balls to do it, because I can't do it by myself. I'm also living a life. I need your help. I need you to be an activist too. I need you to be someone who's educating people about a resource-based economy. People can't choose it if they don't know about it. I'm fine if somebody rejects it, but I think what's not fine is if people don't know about it. So find ways to talk about it. Find ways, even if it's in discussing the Syrian crisis and how sad it is that we're at war with each other all the time. I mean, it's just, we've gotten to a point where we don't need to do this anymore from a technical standpoint. So what's still keeping us there? And I don't have the ultimate solution to offer you of here's what we need to do as steps 1, 2, and 3, and people get very frustrated with that and even think it's a downfall of the movement. But no, I think it's that we view things from a standpoint of, well, it's a systems theory approach. We have to kind of work within the system to create something new. I don't mean work within the political system, but I mean work within the existing culture. Take what we have, the tools of the culture, and use that to inform people, educate people, whether it's media, music, art, using what people are drawn to and attracted to get the message out. And ultimately, I think of Buckminster Fuller's quote that you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, you build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And I really focus on that because that's what we're really doing when we're planting seeds for this. You have to have people wanting this. We have to get to the point where when the biopsychosocial pressures kick in and there are enough people in the streets of most countries that this is the seed that takes a hold. This is the thing that grows in the minds of people who are thinking of what the next vision for structure could be, because it's sort of an end game moment. Keep talking about these ideas and know that others are doing it too. Even if you think that in your community you're the only one doing it, just know others are doing it too. Also, I want to say hello to our Syrian chapter. I know you're out there. I'm wishing you well. I'm hoping we can all find, to me, what's peace? I don't know that we could achieve peace even within a resource-based economy as far as thinking there wouldn't be disagreements. There definitely will be. These kinds of moments are catalytic. And I think as far as reducing violence, where we can reduce violence, even in the way we communicate with each other, to set out to make someone right instead of make someone wrong in a communication is going to get your message heard more than anything else. I see so many people that start off screaming. I have that going on sometimes in my head, but it's not productive. You really need to listen, be a great listener for what somebody cares about, and find out what they care about and connect the benefits of a resource-based economy to that, because the connections are there. If you remove the reward for exploitation, there's really no need for it. And that's what I look forward to in the idea of a resource-based economy, whether or not I see it. Just knowing that it's being talked about, that support for that is growing, is encouraging to me. I think that whatever you can do to educate, you should do. Whatever you can do to circulate information, get people to think and talk about these things, you should do. Even if you think it's not worthwhile. I didn't even want to do this podcast because I thought, well, by the time I do it, it's already going to have happened, and what will I have affected? But I had to think twice and say, well, this is the only thing I can do. And I don't want to not do what I can do. So please join me in that, in educating people about the real reasons why this is going on to the best of your ability. Or to at least have people question the real reasons that are being posed, even if you don't feel comfortable enough talking about what's really going on. I was thinking that there are too many things to care about from an individual standpoint, that we need support. Everyone needs as much support as possible. And even if your part in this is to help give someone support and comfort who is dealing with a lot of stress, you're doing your part too. Doing the local stuff, helping alleviate stress, is doing your part too. But if we really want to move forward, while we're comforting, while we're feeding, while we're sheltering and doing our part as volunteers in our communities, we have to allow people the opportunity to understand why a resource-based economy is a good idea, and in fact is the only way I can see out of this mess we have going on of a human condition right now. Not that it would be a perfect utopia, but if we can get poverty wrapped up, if we can get most of war wrapped up, we can deal with other things. We still may have health issues, relationship issues, but you know what? Let's take care of what we can. And the first step is education. Oh, and before I go, as a follow-up resource, I just want to offer up, if you haven't seen Jeremy Scahill's Dirty Wars movie, I recommend it, or to read the book Dirty Wars, or his book Blackwater. So that's Jeremy Scahill, last name Scahill. He's got a lot of great stuff also available on the internet, YouTube, etc., but he's got the information on a lot of the stuff going on in the Middle East and U.S. relations there. Until next time, I'm Jen Wilding, and I want to thank you as a listener, as a supporter and advocate of this movement, or perhaps somebody who completely hates it but just can't stop listening to all of our radio shows just so you can make that one nasty comment. I thank you too, because this information is getting to you one way or another, that you're here. Thanks.